I'm learning, you're learning, so let's learn together. I'll do all the footwork and heavy lifting to find the guests and subjects that will help broaden our understanding of the Civil War. All I ask from you is your support. Please go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg and learn with me. That's patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. And I thank you in advance.
From the Gettysburg Museum of History Studios,
you're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, patrons. How are you? As we prepare for another winter storm coming here in February of 2025, in just a couple of days, we're going to talk about some people who were far tougher than we are because they endured a winter almost naked, perhaps naked, which must have been a sight. But we're here with Ken Gavin to talk about Valley Forge for the second time. This is part 2, not the second time. This is the extension of part 1. Therefore, we call it part 2. And welcome back, Ken.
Thank you, Matt. Always good to be here. It was a pleasure.
It's always good to have you.
Thank you.
Ken, so let's just recap real quick. Where did we leave off with? We were just getting to
Sure.
the winter.
We were just sort of getting to the meat of the Army's arrival at Valley Forge on December 19th of 1777. In episode 1, we sort of laid a lot of groundwork for what's the context, why is the Army even there, why is Washington selecting this site as opposed to staying at White Marsh or going somewhere else like Wilmington or Lancaster or something
or
like that.
Florida.
Or, yeah. You know,
I would take them to Florida.
Not a bad thought, but a little far away from the seat of war. Then we were sort of there at the encampment and the arrival of the Army, and we titled this thing today "Naked and Starving as They Are," and that actually comes from a quote. That is Washington writing to Governor George Clinton of New York during the course of the encampment in February of 1778. The Parliament Funkadelic at Valley Forge. That's how they kept up morale, Matt.
Funk music?
Yeah, funk music, man, you know.
Yeah, all right.
Funk music and a few other things, too.
Why are we going to beat the British? Because we got the funk.
Oh, it's better than Al Stewart, that's for sure. It was the year of the cat. Might not have inspired anybody.
No, that would have put him to sleep.
You know, it took us 25 minutes to get to Annie Potts last time, and we are already... We're having a great time.
Yeah, I forgot about Annie Potts.
Yeah. But the quote from George Clinton, not the head of the Parliament Funkadelic, Washington is saying in February of 1778, naked and starving as they are, we cannot enough admire the incomparable patience and fidelity of the soldiery. So, you know, it just seemed like a fitting encapsulation of what's going on during the entire course of that encampment itself. So that's our title for today, and I think you'll see it'll be somewhat of a theme as we move through things.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, when you say when he says naked, well, first of all, before we get to that, how so we think of Valley Forge, it's synonymous with bad winters. Mm-hmm. And I think I told you on the previous episode, or at some point, I told you that I grew up around Jockey Hollow in Morristown, New Jersey. And the park ranger there said, you know, Valley Forge gets all the credit for being the bad winter, but we actually had the worst winter. They just learned their lesson at Valley Forge, so they knew how to handle it better. What is the truth to that? Sure. And was the Valley Forge winter a terrible winter, or is it relative because they weren't prepared?
Right. There's definitely truth to what your good friend up at Jockey Hollow said, and I've done work in both Jockey Hollow and Valley Forge over the years, and there really has always been this sort of quiet rivalry of like, hey, you guys down there in the Philadelphia region get all the credit for this thing, but it was a lot worse up here. Candidly, yes, the winter that the Continental Army spends at Morristown in 1779 into 1780 is, based on the meteorological records available, the worst winter of the 18th century in terms of the severity of snow, in terms of the frequency of snow, in terms of the cold temperatures as well. And one of the issues at Morristown is the Army is very much frozen in place during periods of time. There's just inability to get things into the men or for them to move around, and it's a crippling experience up there. Valley Forge is no cakewalk by any means. We have good records in terms of weather for that encampment period as well. And I looked through a few of those last night. There's a guy whose last name is Pemberton up in Bucks County who was a weather freak. He would record barometric pressures and temperatures twice a day at his home. So for the first month that the Continental Army is at Valley Forge, he's recording temperatures that are usually hovering around freezing as a high. There's only one day within the period of December 19th to February 1st where the temperature breaks up into the 40s. Some of the nights are in the single digits that they're there too. Morristown is colder for a more protracted period of time. There's certainly a lot more snow during the Morristown winter, but Valley Forge is no cakewalk at all when it comes to the weather conditions there during that time.
So now, again, the title is Naked, and so I'm assuming that means that they didn't have any form of winter clothing. They just kind of went into camp. Is that right? Or
so naked will have a different kind of meaning in the 18th century. It doesn't mean as in today, like they're in their birthday suit, they just got out of the shower and they're stark naked. It could mean missing several or a few pieces of clothing that are essential. So lacking coats or shirts, stockings, hats, shoes, that sort of thing. Varying degrees of nakedness, but you know, there are certainly several accounts that display the paucity of supplies that are available. And in some instances, for 40 men, there may only be 2 pairs of shoes within a given company, something of that nature. I was going to save it a little bit for later, but I'll just break this out right now from one of the New Hampshire regiments. And I hope I don't do what I did the last time, which was like, yeah, Matt, I've got this great material to share. And then I couldn't find the damn quote, which was what I did the previous time around. And I don't want to do that again to you. Here we go. I know it's this piece of paper right here. The one that doesn't want to cooperate.
always?
There's nothing like dead air.
I know.
You know, it's a killer. Entertain the audience while Ken fumbles.
Let's get a little bit of music going
Here we go.
for you.
All right. So,
Dolly. Hello, Dolly.
Okay, go ahead.
Enoch Poor, who was a brigadier general from New Hampshire in February of 1778, so a few months into the encampment, he is going to try to convey a picture of how poor, well, no pun intended, jeez, it's just happening naturally now, a statistical picture of the clothing available to the New Hampshire regiments he's commanding. And he says there is approximately only one coat to every 100 soldiers, 6 waistcoats to every 100 soldiers, 4 pairs of breeches to every 100 soldiers, shirts 2 for every 9 soldiers, shoes 1 out of 3 soldiers have shoes, only 1 out of 5 have stockings, and only 2 blankets per 100 men.
God. Oh my God.
So it gives you just sort of a random sampling, you know, and that's not an exaggerated experience for most of these guys during especially the first 3 months of the encampment, which from a supply and logistics perspective are an extremely, extremely challenging period of time.
How are they survive? Like 2 blankets for every 100 men.
Mm-hmm. They're getting very creative. You know, they're sharing to the best of their ability. Some brigades, of course, will be a little bit better positioned in terms of others, but Washington had ordered all of the canvas tents. When the Army came into Valley Forge and started to construct huts, whatever canvas was available, he wanted cleaned and stored for spring campaigns when the Army would be on the move. There were several brigadier generals who refused to follow that order because they had no blankets for their men, and anything, even in the huts are cold. I mean, even though it's a structure, don't, kid yourself on that. We've done a lot of stuff in terms of experiential or archaeology, living it out. We're trying to the best of our ability. So on winter nights up at Jockey Hollow, when I would do living history there, by the fire with 10 guys in a hut, you could get it around 75 degrees. By the time you got to the door, and the huts are not big structures, the temperatures had dropped to about 40. And anytime you open that door, you're going to let this blast of cold, and it's going to become even worse. So, it's pretty cold and pretty damp inside there too, with dirt floors and things of that nature.
But I'm sorry, is there any kind of fireplace or anything like that inside?
Yeah, there is, and I think that we should probably talk about hut construction a little bit.
Yeah,
right?
Let's talk about that.
Let's do that, because that's going to be one of the first orders of business. Well, let me back up a little bit more than that. Just so we have a quick recap on why supplies are so bad for this army. And we talked about that in the previous episode, but the logistical structure that is to supply Washington's army. And when he starts the Philadelphia campaign that precedes Valley Forge, that's an army of somewhere between 18 and 20,000 men. So they have to be fed, they have to be clothed on a regular basis. That campaign starts in earnest in August of 1777. And it really lasts right up to the time the army goes into the encampment itself. They're on the move quite a bit. The Philadelphia campaign, if you were to look at a map of the mid-Atlantic region of the United States, put a pin at Elkton, Maryland, which was head of Elk in the 18th century. It's the head of the Chesapeake Bay. And to put another pin at Trenton, New Jersey, and draw an arc connecting those two pins shaded in, you've got now thousands of square miles where Washington's army of 18 to 20,000, Howe's army of about 20,000 are going to fight out the Philadelphia campaign over the course of about 4 months or so. As a result of 40,000 human beings, thousands of draft animals traversing that landscape, which is middle class and subsistence farmers for the most part, a couple of things are going to happen. The landscape is going to be ravaged, because you have men going to the bathroom, animals going to the bathroom, dumping tens of thousands of gallons of urine a day into farm fields. Wherever they need to go, they're going. Yeah. They're not having facilities that are flying them around. Also, foodstuffs and forage, are going to start to disappear pretty quickly from that farming landscape. So you have a ravaged civilian population who is worried that they don't have enough food for the winter. They are worried that their farms will not be arable. You're not going to be able to plant foodstuffs come springtime and planting season. And as Washington's moving around through the course of this campaign, in the very beginning of it, Joseph Trumbull, who is the commissary general is responsible for organizing supplies of food that can be given to the army. He quits his position. Near the end of that campaign in October of 1777, Thomas Mifflin, who is the quartermaster general, the guy responsible for the transportation infrastructure that gets supplies to the army, he quits. So by the time you're getting close to Valley Forge, that supply infrastructure has been shattered. It's like a rudderless ship that is drifting. Nobody is taking care of it the way it should. And in the absence of a competent overseeing authority, you have lots of people who are basically scumbags, because there's scumbags in history just like there are today. Of
course.
They're going to profiteer. They're going to take supplies destined for the army, sell them to the civilians on a black market in a war-ravaged landscape at highly inflated prices. So there's a reason that the army's not getting the clothing. It's not getting tools. It's not getting food. Even though that stuff might exist in places, the infrastructure, totally shot. So the army is in this position where they are getting to be naked and starving even a month before they get to Valley Forge. Okay. And that's not something that's going to be easily fixable.
I'm hearing this stuff and I'm thinking, if it were me, there's no cause that I believe in enough to go through all this bullshit. I'd be deserting. Were there a lot of deserters?
So there are some, but not to the scale that someone might expect. Okay. There are a couple of things at play that I think people should think about. First of all is the social construct of the 18th century military within the Continental Army. It's not like today where if somebody were to enlist in the armed forces, they will go to basic training, could end up in a company of soldiers with folks from all over the country. In the 18th century, when you enlist, you're enlisting with folks from your hometown. So there's people, family members, close friends, people you've known your entire life. There is a built-in peer pressure that comes with that. Mm-hmm. If you leave, what's going to happen? Well, are you turning your back on family and friends who stayed? And if you go home, well, what are you going to say? Mm-hmm.
And the letters coming home. So same as in the Civil War, the letters coming home, they're going to rat you out as a coward.
Yep. Is one motivating factor. Another one is the army that goes into Valley Forge. It's not this demoralized mass. And I think people have a misconception that it's a defeated, disheartened sort of rabble that hobbles in, and they're just waiting until spring. It's an army that, even though they had experienced defeats in the Philadelphia campaign, and to be certain, Brandywine in September is a defeat. The British occupy the capital city by September 26th. Germantown does not go well for the Americans in early October when Washington tries to break Howe's grip on the city. But from general officers at top, Washington through his generals down to the enlisted personnel, the available writings tell us they feel that they performed well. They thought that if they got another shot at the British, they might actually be able to defeat them on an open field. So the morale is not...
The rest of this preview is available over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg.